Hey everybody, my name is Matt. You're watching Broke Rednecks Prepping. Now, the number one topic everybody asks about is where you should be during an SHTF situation. When it hits the fan, where do you want to be located at that time? Well, the answer for anybody with good sense is obviously Texas. And I say that because we're from Texas. But for the people who disagree with me or think I'm being facetious or just haven't completely thought it out, what I did to help you in the internet world is compile a list of 15 reasons why when an SHTF happens, you want to be in the great state of Texas. Now, without a whole lot of ado, I'm going to go ahead and start on the list and just follow along with me. You may like it, you may disagree, but at the same time, fact check me and see what you think. The first reason you want to be in Texas for an SHTF situation is cheap land. Everybody in the prepper community wants a bug out location. Buying property in a lot of places, especially in the US, Canada, can be very expensive. In Texas, especially West Texas, the one thing we have a lot of is land. Wide open land, wooded land, desert land, hilly land. Whatever kind of land you want, we've probably got it. We've even got beachfront property. Anyway, where we're located out in West Texas, you can still buy arable soil ag land for $1,000 an acre. If you compare the prices of bug out type locations, the places that are off in the woods or places where you can grow a garden or have some livestock, you're going to have to look long and hard to find a place with land prices like Texas. I suppose you could buy some desert property in the middle of Arizona or something, but you're not going to be able to do anything with it. If you're wanting the type of bug out location where you can have some livestock, some chickens, a good garden, a well, you really want to think long and hard about Texas. Because for the money, and most preppers are trying to keep everything on a budget, you're going to have a hard time beating rural ag land in Texas for cost. Along those same lines, reason number two is we have a lot of isolated land. We have some large cities with Dallas, Houston, and of course that San Antonio, Austin stretch. But even between them and out west, down to the south, up in the Panhandle, there's a lot of land where you're 35, 40 miles between towns, sometimes much further. Now, some of our land out in far west Texas near El Paso can get a little dry, but if you're looking for an isolated property where you can keep your preps and nobody's going to find them, where you're not on a major highway or thoroughfare, the kind of isolated location most preppers want, where they're left to their own devices, where if a grid does go down, it's not like they've got $20,000 worth of preps in the middle of Manhattan. They're off in an isolated area, be it wooded, be it hilly, again, your choice. Texas has more isolated land than pretty much any place you're going to find except maybe Alaska or somewhere. It's land you can get to. We do have a good road and highway system, but in a grid down situation, you're not going to have people just wandering up. And ironically, that's usually the least expensive land. And most of that land is you can do minor agriculture on. You can put livestock or have a garden or build a getaway cabin, park an RV out there, whatever you want. But especially if you're looking for a bug out location where nobody's going to find you, you're going to have a hard time finding somewhere better than Texas to buy that property. So isolated land is a pretty good reason to think about the Lone Star State. Number three is we have a very solid ag industry. Now, I know a lot of places have good ag industry. Kansas has wheat, South Dakota, Nebraska, corn. But something to consider here is Texas has an ag industry across the board. Depending on what kind of foods you want to be able to grow, you're going to be able to find some soil and topography here that'll work with you. But something else is we don't just farm, we don't just ranch. You're going to find guys that they may have a couple thousand acres in cotton, a couple thousand acres in cattle or corn or whatever. Our ranching and our farming tend to go hand in hand. We also have the chicken farms, the pig farms, things like that. So if your bug out situation isn't necessarily an off the grid deal, if you're wanting to be somewhere where even after a grid down situation, you'd be able to get a hold of fresh meat, good vegetables, wheat, corn, that sort of thing. There are a lot of towns in Texas, in fact most of the state, where you're going to see a cultivated pasture right across the street from a cattle pasture, which is a very valuable thing because it also means that the ag industry is self-sustaining. It's not just that you can buy the corn from farmer A and buy some chickens or cattle from farmer rancher B. It's that the rancher can buy the corn from the other rancher and they can sustain. They can horse trade or barter, however you want to look at it. And when you have that interlocking and self-sustaining ag industry, a lot of states don't, a lot of countries don't. If you've got a situation like that where your ag industry is interlocked and sustainable, it's been that way since the 1800s. Everybody says if the grid goes down, we're going back to the 1800s. Well, look at your history. Texas did the 1800s pretty well, and we don't have to fight the Comanches anymore. So with that in mind, you want to look for an area where you've got an ag industry that is self-sustaining but also self-reliant, where if you're going to raise cattle or you're going to raise chickens, you're going to be able to barter for the grain, for the feed you need to keep that livestock alive long after the grid goes down. And that interwoven system that we've had for our agriculture in Texas for, 150 years now, is something that if we have a major SHTF situation where the grid goes down, you're going to find exceptionally valuable, because the same cannot be said for a lot of other parts of the country. The number one thing everybody thinks of Texas for, and it is my number 4 reason to move to Texas, is our gun laws. In the state of Texas, as some of you all may know, you have to get a license to carry a handgun everywhere you go. You can own them, we do not register them, you do not have to have a license to possess them, you can shoot them on your own property, you've got a lot of leeway. We really don't care how many bullets you put into it or how many handguns you own. But you have to get a license to carry it in public, which isn't very expensive, it's about 40 bucks. However, shotguns and rifles, you can carry in your vehicle to your heart's content. It's perfectly legal. We're a state that prides ourselves on our open gun laws. Our last governor, Rick Perry, was trying to lure firearms manufacturers to Texas and had some conspicuous success with it. Now, I point out the gun laws because if you're wanting to prep, you're wanting to store ammo, probably reload, you're going to have 4 or 5 different guns per person, hunting, tactical, everyday carry, that sort of thing. Texas is a place where you can stockpile those and not have to worry about breaking any laws at the state level. We're not real particular. Beyond getting a license to carry it in public, open or concealed, the handgun specifically, we really don't care how many guns or how many bullets or whatever else you have. If you want to reload, like we do, and like a lot of Texans do, Texas is a place where if you want to have 10,000 rounds of ammunition in your closet, consider it done. A while back, I was watching the news, and somebody talking about a guy that got arrested, and they said he was caught with an arsenal. He had 4 guns and 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Friends, in Texas, if I had 2,000 rounds of ammunition, I would consider myself out of ammunition. That's how we work, and that is something to consider, because you want to be able to build up your preps ahead of time, and your firearms and your ammunition are a big part of that. You want to be in a state where you can do that legally. So, consider Texas because the gun laws. We're always very proud of those. Number 5 is a deviation number 4, specifically the gun culture. And the reason I broke that up is a lot of states you can have firearms, handgun, rifle, whatever. In Texas, you can have them all. And people didn't just grow up at a range when they used a gun, they didn't go to a range and just punch holes in paper. We didn't have the silhouette target that went down 15 yards in an air-conditioned room. Come to think of it, I was probably in high school or older before I went to a range to shoot on anything other than the high school rifle team. I grew up shooting on my granddad's ranch. We'd plink turtles, we hunted. I didn't learn to shoot by going to a range and doing things like a lot of people do. My granddad took me out with a .22 rifle and taught me how to shoot by an old tank on his place. A lot of people are accustomed to that. And the reason I think that's valuable is because we're used to shooting around other people in less controlled environments. There's not a range safety officer behind us telling us what to do. So we're already accustomed to, when we have firearms around, knowing where other people are. Most of us grew up hunting. That's valuable because when you're out hunting a deer or a quail, especially your bird hunting, you've got to be very cognizant of where other hunters are. And that's a valuable thing. A lot of guys who shoot on ranges with their little alley, other than pointed at the piece of paper, they really don't think about other shooters. And they don't even have to worry about whether or not the range is hot, because they can hit a little button over here and it brings the target back. And I point that out because that gun culture has taught everybody. We teach our girls to shoot. We teach kids at a fairly young age to shoot. We also teach them gun safety. And part of that gun culture is, last time I checked the statistics, and some of y'all will fact check me and probably find it slightly different. Of the 50 states, Texas was number 4 in gun safety per capita. And we have a big population with a lot of people who mess around with firearms. And we don't have the volume of firearm accidents that you see in a lot of other places. People start hunting and shooting at a younger age. So we don't necessarily have the gun crime. If you don't believe me on that one, compare the statistics of Houston to Chicago. Because when you look at them socioeconomically, ethnically, and everything else, size-wise population, they're fairly similar. But Houston is a much safer city. We are accustomed to everybody having access to a firearm. If you're in Texas and you don't have a gun, I assure you, somebody's going to be happy to loan you one until you can get one. But that culture of having them around has led Texas to be, I guess, just to have a better sense of independence. But in a grid down situation where every prepper and their dog is busting out the AR-15, you're going to see a whole lot less dumb stuff happen in a place like Texas than you would, say, in a New York or in LA in the same situation. So consider the gun culture, because the gun culture ties into other portions, other things you're going to look at. Now, as I mentioned, we grew up hunting, most of us, and that leads me into reason number 6, which is the wildlife. Texas has a very varied wildlife. If you're wanting to buy some land, you've got a budget, you're going to get a little house and land with it, you would probably be able to self-sustain. I mean, you'd have to get a little creative. You're not going to be able to shoot deer every week. But when it comes to the wild game like rabbits, your larger birds, quail, bird like dove you might want to hunt, we've got pretty much everything you'd want to hunt. Yes, I know somebody in Maine is going to tell me they want to shoot moose, but we've got big game, medium size, and small game here. So if you're planning to try to live off the land, Texas is a pretty good place to do it. Something else to consider along those lines is Texas, because of its private property rights, has done a much better job managing its wild game than most other states. Not to pick on Maine, but I've hunted in Maine several times. And despite all of the wooded area up there, it's really hard to get a buck. I mean, I was at a camp with 20 guys, 2 of them shot a buck that year. And you'd see deer tracks, you'd see some does, all that. See, coyote tracks everywhere. I mean, they got more coyotes than we do, and it's 2 feet of snow up there. I don't know how the coyotes live. But you don't see the number of deer. Now, in Texas, we actually had more deer in the state of Texas in the year 2000 than we did in the year 1900. Where other portions of the country are seeing their wildlife populations diminish massively, Texas is seeing them increase. Dickens County, where I live now, when I was a kid, let's go back to the 80s, you didn't see many deer. I mean, it was noteworthy if you did see one. Now, they're a friggin' nuisance. You can't hardly drive around the road without them jumping out in front of you. They're everywhere. And it's because Texas in the last 30, 40 years has done such a wonderful job conserving their wildlife, allowing their hunters who put a lot of time and money into wildlife conservation to grow the populations, the very things they were going to hunt. And because of that, Texas has a wonderful selection of wildlife to hunt. Now, I'm sure with a grid down situation, there'd be some crazy stuff going on with it because everybody's going to go out and try to shoot a deer or somebody's cow or whatever. People get hungry, they're going to do some dumb stuff. But at the same time, if you can get a piece of property, bug out location ahead of time, subsisting for a not unreasonable amount of time off the wild game on a piece of land is not an unreasonable expectation. Now, I made a note here as it applies to wildlife. We have a lot of feral hogs. They are the bane of every farmer's existence because they root up things. One, well, in the winter months, you probably don't want to shoot a pig in the summer if there's no electricity because it's kind of hard to butcher a pig in hot weather. But come pig killing season, or as my friends from Louisiana would say, hog killing weather. Now, come that time of year, you're going to be able to harvest a lot of pork. It would not be in most portions of the state an unreasonable expectation, even in a grid down situation, to harvest enough pork off feral hogs to where if you did smoke it or turn it into sausage, it would reasonably sustain a family for a year. But the other thing to understand about the feral hogs, and even some of our birds or fowl, is that they're not hard to domesticate. If you can set up a pen that will hold them, keep them from rooting out, and you have the grain to feed them, you're not going to have a very hard time taking feral hogs and turning them into domestic pigs. The term feral really means stray. All the feral hogs we have in Texas, it's not like they were indigenous. They're pigs. They were pigs that got loose from a farm and began breeding in the wild and became strays. Not unlike a dog or a cat might escape and go breed in the wild. That's all feral hogs are. While most feral hogs are obviously not domesticated, it would not be terribly hard to redomesticate them. In fact, a lot of people will trap pigs and they'll take them back to a pig farm, and at that pig farm they start feeding them grain again, put some weight on them, and then take them to sell for the butcher. But we have enough in the way of feral hogs that you're not going to have a hard time capturing some of them and starting some type of farm for yourself, or just hunting them, subsisting off of that. Because there's one thing I know about feral hogs and farmers is even in a grid down situation where you've got zombies running loose and everybody's starving, farmers are not going to be pissed off if you shoot feral hogs. They're going to be like, yeah, come on, take care of them. So consider that as well, because that wildlife, and especially the feral hogs, can sustain a lot more people than most areas of the country, and most people in those areas realize. Number 7 is that Texas has an independent power grid. For those of you all who don't know, there are 3 major power grids in the United States of America: East, West, Texas. Now, the reason that is important is because Texas would be completely separate. In the event of a terrorist attack hitting a power grid in, say, the East Coast or the Pacific area, Los Angeles, that sort of thing, Texas is going to be largely unaffected. We can actually produce quite a bit more power than we need. More than once, we've had to ship it to California, which runs up our electric bills because they never pay us back. But at the same time, we can produce a massive amount of power. And somebody taking out a large portion of the U.S.'s power grid, even if they took out both, could still leave Texas intact. However, believe it or not, as big as Texas is, its power grid is tiny compared to either of the other two. And that makes it a whole lot easier to fix it, to get it up and running. And that is something to file away, because most of Texas's power grid is completely self-sustaining. And if a terrorist attack did take out the power grid going from Miami to Canada, lights are still on in the great state of Texas. And because we produce so much of our own power through wind, through solar, through our oil and gas industry, we're not going to have to import in the goods to turn the power back on. We also have several production facilities to make the equipment and materials that they would need to fix in the case, I don't know, say somebody took out a transfer station or something like that. Texas is going to be able to produce the materials they need to get the grid up and running a whole lot quicker than the rest of the country. And even if, say, an EMP happened and took out the grid in North America, I would put money on it that Texas has lights going again probably a couple years before everybody else. And if you're in Ohio or someplace, it's a long walk to Texas once the power comes on. My advice, be in Texas to start with. Now, a lot of people look at Texas, especially the western portion of the Panhandle, and they think it's dry, and they're correct. We get rain, but we don't get a massive amount. You don't see the big rivers like the Mississippi or the Colorado or one of those running through it the way you do in other parts of the country. You're right. Doesn't have the number of lakes the Adirondacks or something else does. But one thing we do have is massive aquifers. That's why so many people in Texas that have rural land have wells. In fact, if you see a windmill is just a well. It's using wind power to pump a little pipe in the ground, pull water back out. And almost everybody in the cattle industry uses windmills to water their livestock. You see them everywhere. The Panhandle of Texas, the Llano Estacado, which is basically runs from Lubbock up into the Great Plains, it's sitting on a massive aquifer, the Andrews Aquifer down in San Antonio. If you look at aquifer maps of Texas, even in incredibly dry areas, you are not going to have a hard time finding one, top of the groundwater, and some rivers and streams coming through, especially seasonally. But you're going to have a very easy time finding land that has a self-sustaining water source, and one that you could run off of just a relatively small windmill. I'm not even talking something that requires outside power. I mean, one that the wind literally turns a little wheel and it pulls water out. Consider that, because the number one thing that every prepper has to file away when it comes out to a bug out location, every survivalist needs to think about when it comes to surviving off the wild, and the one thing that everybody in a grid down situation is going to start missing very quickly is water. You want to be somewhere where you have a sustainable water source. And in these, as I mentioned, fairly inexpensive and isolated properties in Texas, you are not going to have a hard time finding reliable water. Again, fact check me, do some research, see what you see, but I guarantee you that's something you're going to find, and it's going to be a very important thing if the grid goes down. Number 9 I have is a livable climate. What I mean by that is we're not Alaska or even Minnesota or Kansas or somewhere. We can, in the northern portions of the state, get cold in the winter. Here's looking at you, Amarillo. Here in Lubbock, it snowed once last year. Well, kind of a dusted a second time. We had several nights that went below freezing. But when that big Arctic front came through the Midwest and Chicago was like negative 50 or something, almost cartoonishly cold, Texas wasn't. We get hot in the summer, especially right now, July into early August. It can get pretty toasty out here, but not Iraq hot, not deserts of Arizona hot. You're not going to die because of the heat. You'll be uncomfortable, but drink some water. You'll be okay. Our fall and our spring in most portions of the state are actually quite pleasant. And down in South Texas, they're actually delightful. If you like leaves changing and things like that, you probably want to be in North Texas, the Panhandle. But we actually have seasons. But even our coldest portion of the winter, you're not going to have enough extended cold days in a row to really have it be bothersome. If you're looking for something in the way of a bug out location, if you've got a small fireplace or a wood burning stove, you're going to be okay. And that's a big thing because so much of the country is either going to be really, really cold or it's in the winter, like people are going to die because of it cold, or it's going to be really, really hot in the summer. And Texas is really not going to be either. I mean, there are a few portions that will get a little hot, check your weather forecast. But where we are, which is kind of east of Lubbock, Panhandle, Hill Country, like I say, you can get uncomfortable hot, but it's not getting lethal hot. And that's something to look at, because if you're going to plant gardens or you're going to have to live without air conditioning, the climate you choose is going to be vitally important. Now, Texas also has a self-reliant culture. And what I mean by that is, especially the rural portions of the state, which geographically is most of it, we're accustomed to not being able to run to a Target or a Walmart whenever we feel like it. Most of the people are used to having to change their own oil or fix their own car. Now I exclude our major urban centers here, Dallas, Fort Worth, Metroplex, Houston, and Austin, San Antonio. Especially Austin. Those people are crazy. I mean, they work really hard to keep it weird. Just understand that. But outside of that, you're going to find the majority of people can handle a lot of their own basic home maintenance. They can change their own oil or tire or something like that. They're not on a daily basis trying to subcontract everything. As a result, in the grid down situation, you're going to see a lot of people who know how to problem solve. They can figure out a way to survive. Whereas a lot of urban dwellers, they're not going to last very long. But especially in your rural towns, and if you find a small town in Texas, especially West Texas or down to the south or the north, up in the Panhandle, if the grid goes down, people are going to be annoyed because it means no air conditioning and no football on Sundays in the fall. But beyond that, it's not going to have the life or death effect that it will in a lot of places, because people will be able to figure out how to make it. They're also going to be able to figure out how to get some electricity back on. We have, besides the oil and gas industry, we've also got plenty of windmills, plenty of solar. And a lot of people in this area have already gone off the grid, especially in West Texas, the Panhandle. You're going to see a lot of homesteads, they have their own water well. They've got solar or wind, some type of power. I mean, we can't drive to Lubbock without seeing several houses that do. So you're going to see a whole lot of folks that have already planned for this type of eventuality. And not the one or two here and there that everybody knows about and is going to go to their house and steal their stuff, but a whole lot of them. You also have small power grids in Texas that are self-sustaining for this community or that. Same with water districts that might not be affected by a larger blackout. And that culture of independence, of self-sustaining, is worth a whole lot when it comes to a grid down situation. However, when it comes to energy, you gotta understand, right now, if Texas seceded from the Union, what is now the state of Texas is the world's third largest oil producer. It is because President Trump turned the oil industry in Texas, largely Texas and southern New Mexico, loose, that gas price, oil production is at a peak, and gas prices really aren't that bad. Texas has the ability to pull a massive amount of oil out of the ground. Last estimate I saw in the Midland, Odessa area is 49 billion barrels of oil. What's insane is, despite the fact that they have been drilling oil out of that portion of Texas since the 1920s, The lowest estimate I have seen is that 82% of that oil is still in the ground. We could probably run most of the world with our oil production. And as we put in pipelines and get the infrastructure down, something that they just hadn't done in the past, we're finding that Texas can actually produce more oil than Saudi Arabia. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years they're not doing that, because they are getting really good with the fracking, the horizontal drilling, and everything else. They produce natural gas like it's going out of style. Now, I point that out because New York, California, Illinois, they do not produce their own oil. So they're going to have a problem when it comes to getting the lights back on. They also, those big urban areas, don't have the room to set up giant windmills or solar farms. And Texas has lots of them. If you don't believe me, come down to the Panhandle and look at all the windmills we have. They are everywhere. And Texas can produce, be it wind or natural gas or oil energy, Texas can produce enough to get back on its feet very quickly. But another thing that sets Texas apart from even other states like Louisiana is we can also refine our oil. So we have, out in West Texas where we're pulling it out of the ground, we're also seeing gas plants and refineries pop up to where only a few miles from where the oil comes out of the ground, it goes to a refinery and comes out gasoline or motor oil or the stuff they turn into rubber. And that is a huge thing, because if somebody could figure out how to turn on the power at one of those plants, all of a sudden they're producing gasoline and diesel again. And that is something that if you look at where refineries are and where oil production is, you're going to find there's not many portions of the country that would be able to turn the lights back on and get the cars running very quickly. Texas will. And that stuff is going to be available to people in a circular fashion. It's going to start in the center and it's going to work its way out, and the ripples will get smaller. But the closer you are to oil and gas production, refining, or the wind power, the quicker you're going to have lights and vehicles and that sort of thing working again. And that's something to consider, because if the grid goes down, you don't want it to be down forever. You want to plan on what happens when it comes back up. And Texas is the place to be because we can't get the grid back up without energy of some sort. Texas has it in spades. We'll probably be selling it to other people. Now, while we have a self-reliant culture, we also have a lot of small town people. See, for those of y'all who live in cities, you're probably accustomed to public transportation, to things like a hospital not being very far away, blocks or a few miles at worst. See, we have a lot of rural areas and small towns where that's not the case, where if my mother gets sick and needs a ride to the hospital, she doesn't have to wait for me to come back to town to take her. She can call a neighbor, she can call somebody from the church. Neighbors help each other. When one of the neighbors over here, the older woman lives down the street and needs a grass cut, we take care of it. When there's an issue at our house, we're out of town and a branch comes down in a storm, one of the neighbors just comes over and chops it up for us. It's not one of those we have to call them and ask them. It's already done before we even find out that it's down. Being able to get near a small community, especially in a stressful situation like a grid down, where you're in a community of people, they all garden, they're willing to share, they're willing to help each other out. If you're willing to be a part of the community and throw in your fair share, you're going to find people are going to have your back. And that's something you're not going to find in a city. And if you can find a rural town, especially in your more ag-based areas, West Texas, South Texas, you're going to find everybody is going to help each other out. I mean, they're not going to let people fall behind if they can help it. That is going to be immensely valuable. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure out you don't want to be in a city if the grid goes down, and we have lots of small towns where everybody's going to want to help each other out. Number 13 is our proximity to Mexico. And I know everybody out there is like, "The hell are you talking about, Matt? That's stupid." Well, the reason I say that is because most of the scenarios that would cause a grid to go down in the U.S., EMP, terrorist attack, we just hadn't fixed it in the last 50 years and it finally broke, shit like that, is going to require some amount of manufacturing. Well, if the power's out, how are we going to manufacture? If there's a major natural disaster affecting the U.S. or Canada, yes, it might be affecting Mexico too. However, it probably won't be. I mean, it depends, I guess, on what it is. If it's a giant volcano that clocks out the sun for years, and I guess everybody's screwed. But for most of the realistic scenarios that would affect the U.S. and cause a long-term, countrywide grid down situation, Mexico will probably be affected, but it won't be as affected. Texas also has the Gulf, so we have ports and other things where we get things in. But we have a land border with Mexico. In fact, a lot of Ford vehicles are produced in Mexico. You'd be amazed at the number of things that are manufactured in Mexico that come across that border. And that's going to be vitally important because we're going to need parts, materials, probably even some manpower to come over here and help fix a power grid, to help fix road systems, to fix a whole lot of things. And as much as people now in this climate want to build a wall, and frankly I've lived along the border long enough, I don't necessarily disagree with them, it is something to consider because we're going to need spare parts for things, and if our factories are shut down, Mexico's probably going to be far enough south to have some of them still going. So that trade is going to be helpful. Texas also just across the board has the infrastructure to rebuild in a major grid down situation. As I mentioned, we produce pretty much everything we need here to get the grid back up. We're close enough to Mexico, we'd be able to get what parts we needed, especially the small bits. We've got the road system, the agricultural system, the people and personalities. We've got water, we've got the ability to generate energy, all that now. And we'd be able to turn it back on fairly quickly. As a result, because, I mean, let's be honest, if the grid goes down, I mean, that seems cool to think about, well, it'd be the zombie apocalypse. That just sounds awesome. I mean, I like to think I'm more handsome than Daryl, but I can work a crossbow. Anyway, the problem with that is that's going to get real old when you go your first summer without air conditioning, your winter without heat, and you got to eat feral hog all the time, and you're in the mood for brook trout or something. You're going to get real tired of that. First time that I have to miss getting pho on a Thursday, that's going to piss me off. So I'm going to want the grid to be back up. You want to be in an area where it's going to come up quicker than other areas. You want to be in one of the first places to have that happen. Depending on the natural disaster, but I think by and large, based on what I see from people talking about natural disasters, the vast majority of your high statistic issues that would cause a grid down situation, Texas is going to be probably first in the nation about having the overall infrastructure to fix it. I mean, Texas already plans for when the rest of the country goes to crap and we have to go it on our own. Fact check me, Secretary of State said that, the one from Texas. They've already got plans in place. They've got the roads, they've got the water, they've got everything else, but they've also got the plans in place in case something happens to get the state running again, and probably quicker than everybody else, and that's going to be a valuable thing. Now, the last thing I have here, number 15 on my list, I promise you 15, is Texas has the best laws and the best business environment pre-SHTF. Now, I say this, we're not being paid by the Texas Tourism Bureau or Chamber of Commerce or something to tell people to move here. But if you're wanting to prepare, means to do things ahead of time, so when SHTF happens, you're not wishing that you bought the extra can of peaches or bag of rice. You've already got it. Texas right now has very low unemployment. There's jobs for everybody. The economy's growing. We've got more openings for jobs than we have people applying. We've already got cheap land. We've got isolated land. We've got cheap isolated land within a 60 or 70 minute drive of a major city. We've got land you can have water on. You can start your preps, your chickens, your cows, your ducks, whatever it is. I don't know, whatever you want. Your prepper garden. You can start buying the guns and ammo and reloading and all the other stuff you want. You can do that now, but Texas has the laws in place where they're not going to screw with you if you do, most places. There are a couple urban counties that they get a little pissy if you like run stuff off a generator, but most of the state doesn't care. But we've also got the best business environment to where you can come to Texas and buy the property or the house and all that stuff and still work a job that's going to pay you a livable wage. And like I say, number one thing about being a prepper is to be prepared, which means doing it ahead of time. And if you're going to do this ahead of time, you want to be somewhere you can make an honest and decent living, have enough to prepare and set aside to get the preps you need in place so that when whatever S hits the fan, whatever it may be from whatever source, you're as good to go as you can be. And there are not a whole lot of places, not a whole lot of states in the United States of America that are going to be, however unintentionally, as prepper friendly as the state of Texas. And that's something you really need to consider. Because if you're in some places like Oregon where they fine you for getting groundwater, or California where I think there's something in the water because those people are crazy, it's going to make it a little harder to have all your stuff in order. But if you're in Texas, you're going to find people just like you who are doing the same thing, and you're going to find the ability, the environment where you're going to be able to prep and be comfortable doing it. So whenever the bad things do happen, you don't have to worry then. Anyway, that was my 15 reasons why you need to be in Texas for SHTF. I hope you enjoyed it. However, if some of y'all have some ideas, agree, disagree, whatever, you're not going to hurt my feelings, like, comment, hit the subscribe thing. We really appreciate it. And I hope to see you next time. Thanks.